The frozen grass crunched beneath their boots as they stood in tight rows, breaths fogging the December air. The German prisoners watched as American guards rolled a large wooden crate into the middle of the camp yard. Murmurs rippled through the assembled men. Uneasy glances exchanged as the box was pried open. They had learned to fear unexpected deliveries, perhaps new restrictions, punishment devices, or humiliating tasks. When the first black and white object bounced across the frozen ground, confusion spread across their faces. It was a soccer ball, followed by another and another, tumbling from the crate like strange fruit. Hauptmann Dieter Müller stepped forward instinctively, his foot stopping one ball that rolled toward him. The leather felt achingly familiar against his boot, a ghost from another life. The American captain nodded at him, a slight smile breaking the usual rigid mask. "Football," he said, gesturing to the open space. "You guys against us."
Tomorrow afternoon. The prisoners stood motionless, uncomprehending. They had expected many things in captivity: hunger, beatings, forced labor, but never this invitation to play. The ball rested against Mueller's boot like a question that had no answer. When the American guards began marking field boundaries with white lime, reality crystallized. They were serious. After 3 years of war, after submarine battles in the Atlantic and desert fighting in North Africa, after the humiliation of capture and the long voyage to America, their enemies were inviting them to play a game. The shock silenced even the most talkative prisoners. Back in their barracks that night, they sat on bunks, eyes distant, voices low. Had they misunderstood? Was this some elaborate joke or cruel test? Sport between captors and captives defied everything they had been told about American savagery. Mueller held the soccer ball they'd been allowed to keep, his fingers tracing the stitches as though reading a secret message. The first match stood frozen in time for the men who experienced it, the moment when the barriers between enemy and human began to blur. When the American guards jogged onto the field in athletic shorts despite the winter chill, the German prisoners arrived in carefully arranged formations, as though reporting for inspection rather than recreation. The first hesitant kicks seemed to carry the weight of nations at war. Each pass felt laden with more than leather and air. It carried questions about what captivity truly meant, about the nature of the enemy they had been trained to hate. When the first American defender slid across frozen grass to block a German forward shot, helping him up afterward with an extended hand, something fundamental shifted in the atmosphere of Camp Concordia, Kansas. The morning after the first match, Private Stefan Brandt woke before dawn. His legs ached pleasantly from yesterday's exertion, a familiar sensation from Sunday matches back in Munich before the war. He lay still on his bunk, listening to the steady breathing of men around him, and tried to reconcile the Americans he had faced on the battlefield with those he had played against yesterday. The propaganda films had shown them as undisciplined, soft degenerates, cowboys playing at war, yet the guards who had marked them on the field were fit, skilled, and, most surprisingly, fair in their play. No dirty tackles, no exploitation of their authority when calls were disputed. Brandt had expected brutality, or at least humiliation. Instead, he had experienced something closer to respect. The camp routine resumed with morning roll call, but conversations during breakfast centered entirely around the match.
Men who had barely spoken since capture now gesticulated animatedly, replaying key moments, debating strategies for the rematch. Lieutenant Weber, once a semi-professional player for Schalke, had scored twice with headers that even the American guards had applauded. The victory, small as it was, had restored something the men hadn't realized they'd lost, not just pride, but identity beyond prisoner or enemy. "They let us win," insisted Corporal Eckhart, hunched over his coffee mug, "to soften us up. Everything these Americans do has a purpose." "Nonsense," replied Mueller, the team's impromptu captain. "You saw their faces when Weber scored. That was real disappointment, and real respect afterward." Brandt nodded silently, remembering how the American captain had approached Mueller after the match, shaking his hand firmly. "Good game," he had said in accented German.
"Next week, we won't go easy on you." The words had been delivered with a smile that transformed his face from authority figure to simply another athlete acknowledging skill. When work details were assigned that morning, Brandt and several others who had played were sent to a nearby farm to help with winter preparations. The American farmer, a broad-shouldered man named Thomas Hendricks, watched them cautiously at first. By midday, having observed their efficient work, he approached Brandt as he repaired a fence. "Heard you fellas beat our boys at soccer yesterday," he said, his weathered face breaking into an unexpected grin. "My son was a guard there. Said one of you Germans could kick like a mule." The casual mention of the match, as though discussing a local high school game rather than a contest between enemies, left Brandt momentarily speechless. Before he could respond, Hendricks continued, "Used to play a bit myself, before the knee went bad. More baseball around here, though."
"You boys play that in Germany?" The conversation that followed was stilted by language barriers, but marked the first time Brandt had spoken to an American civilian as something other than a defeated enemy. As they worked together fitting new boards to the fence, Hendricks showed him a photograph of his son in uniform, the same guard who had played defense during yesterday's match. The worn photo, carried in a calloused hand, humanized the man in ways that seemed dangerous to acknowledge. That night, Brandt wrote in his journal, "The most confusing thing is not their abundance of food or the vastness of their farms. It is their ability to see us as men rather than merely as enemies. Today, a farmer showed me a photo of his son with pride, the same son who guards us with a rifle. How can these Americans separate the war from the warrior so easily? And why were we never able to do the same?" The unexpected soccer league flourished as winter yielded to spring. What had begun as occasional matches evolved into a formal tournament with teams from different barracks competing against various guard units. Scoreboards tracked standings. Referees, a mix of prisoners and Americans, enforced rules with impartial authority. The camp newspaper began publishing match results alongside war news, creating the surreal juxtaposition of battle updates from Europe alongside tournament standings from inside the wire. Hans Schmidt, a former medic captured in Tunisia, found himself assigned as team doctor, treating sprained ankles and muscle strains for both Germans and Americans. The role gave him unique insight into the psychology transforming the camp. "I bandage an American guard's knee, and he thanks me as though I were his hometown physician," Schmidt confided to his diary. "Yesterday, I saw him share cigarettes with Mueller after their match. Last year, we were trying to kill each other in the desert." The human capacity for adaptation is terrifying and wonderful. Schmidt's observations captured the gradual normalization of what had once seemed impossible. The soccer field became neutral territory, governed by rules that superseded the war itself. When disputes arose over calls, they were resolved through the same process as any civilian match: discussion, occasional grumbling, ultimate acceptance. The authority that backed these resolutions came not from rifles or regulations, but from the shared commitment to the game's integrity. For prisoners who had expected harsh treatment based on Nazi propaganda about American brutality, this fair play extended beyond mere sportsmanship. It challenged fundamental assumptions about their captors. Each correctly called penalty against an American team, each acknowledgement when a ball went out of bounds, each handshake after a hard-fought match. These small moments of honesty and respect accumulated, creating cognitive dissonance that was increasingly difficult to ignore. "Remember what Goebbels told us?" Mueller remarked one evening, his voice low as men cleaned mud from their boots. "That Americans would torture prisoners, that they were undisciplined savages who respected nothing. Yet they enforce rules against themselves in a meaningless game with their captives." No one answered, but the silence itself spoke volumes. The evidence contradicting years of propaganda mounted with each passing day. Not through lectures or re-education programs, but through direct experience that couldn't be dismissed as manipulation. By April 1944, the soccer program had expanded to include matches against local high school teams and factory workers under careful supervision. This team, traveling in guarded trucks to nearby fields, experienced their first glimpses of American towns beyond the camp perimeter. They saw streets without bomb damage, shops with full shelves,
children who stared at them with curiosity rather than fear. After ein such match gegen workers from einem grain elevator, the hosts provided a picnic dinner that left many prisoners speechless. Fried chicken, potato salad, and apple pie in quantities that seemed wasteful by European wartime standards. They feed even their factory workers better than our officers ate before capture, Schmidt noted with disbelief. And they share this food with enemy prisoners as casually as they would with neighbors. When the German team managed a narrow victory against the local champions, the American spectators applauded their skill with genuine appreciation. This simple acknowledgement of prowess, divorced from nationality or military status, affected many prisoners more deeply than they cared to admit. To be seen first as athletes, as men with ability and dignity, rather than merely as conquered enemies, this recognition contained a power that transcended the physical freedom they had lost. As summer approached, the soccer field became the center of camp life. Matches drew crowds of off-duty guards and prisoners alike. Side betting with cigarettes and small privileges was common. The quality of play improved as both sides trained seriously, pride now invested in performance. When teams were occasionally mixed, Germans and Americans assigned randomly to ensure balanced competition, the initial awkwardness gave way to functional teamwork that would have seemed impossible months earlier. During one such mixed match, an unexpected thunderstorm swept across the Kansas plains. Rather than ending play, both Americans and Germans continued through the downpour, sliding through mud, laughing at spectacular falls, united momentarily by the shared absurdity of their dedication. When lightning finally forced them to seek shelter in a nearby maintenance shed, 30 men, guards and prisoners, found themselves pressed together, soaking wet and oddly bonded by the experience. Someone started singing The Happy Wanderer in German, and to everyone's surprise, several Americans joined in, having learned the tune from their captives. Standing there among enemies who no longer quite fit that category, Schmidt felt something shift permanently in his understanding of the war, of America, and of what would follow. "We have become something else to each other," he wrote that night, water still dripping from the pages of his journal. Not friends, the war makes that impossible, but no longer simply enemy. There should be a word for people who see each other's humanity, despite being ordered not to. The soccer program at Camp Concordia was no isolated phenomenon. By mid-1944, dozens of prisoner-of-war camps across America had established similar athletic programs. Military records show that these activities were encouraged as part of a deliberate strategy. Healthy prisoners with constructive outlets were less likely to attempt escape or cause discipline problems. What the American authorities hadn't fully anticipated was how these programs would affect both the captives and their guards. Captain Richard Monroe, who supervised recreation programs at Camp Concordia, documented the transformation in monthly reports to his superiors. "The athletic programs have exceeded expectations in terms of prisoner morale and camp stability," he wrote in February. By June, his assessment had evolved. "These activities have created unexpected bridges of communication. Prisoners who participate regularly in sports programs show markedly different attitudes toward their American counterparts compared to non-participants." The statistical evidence was compelling. Barracks with high participation in sports reported fewer disciplinary incidents. Work productivity on assigned labor details improved among those who played regularly. Even health metrics showed positive correlations. Active prisoners required less medical attention for both physical and psychological complaints. Yet the numbers captured only the surface of the transformation. The deeper changes occurred in individual minds, in moments rarely documented but profoundly significant. When Corporal Eckhart, once the most virulently anti-American voice in the barracks, accepted coaching advice from an American guard on improving his defensive positioning, something fundamental shifted. When Private Sullivan asked Mueller to teach him the German football songs they sang during matches, barriers lowered that no official policy could have affected. It was the autumn of 1944, and the rules of the game had changed.
After months of informal matches, Captain Monroe had instituted a formal tournament structure with proper officiating, scorekeeping, and even small trophies crafted by prisoners with woodworking skills. The soccer field had been upgraded with proper goalposts, corner flags, and bleachers for spectators. What had begun as a surprising diversion had evolved into the central social institution of Camp Concordia. Mueller stood at midfield during the championship match, sweat streaming despite the October chill. His team of barracks representatives faced a select squad of American guards in the tournament final, the culmination of weeks of elimination rounds. Several hundred spectators lined the field. Prisoners, off-duty guards, and even a small contingent of local townspeople permitted to attend under supervision. The atmosphere crackled with the peculiar intensity that transcends friendly competition. When the American captain approached for the pre-match handshake, Mueller recognized him immediately, Lieutenant Robert Anderson, whose brother had died during the fighting in Normandy just 3 months earlier. This information had filtered through the camp grapevine, carried by guards who spoke too freely during work details. Both men knew it, neither acknowledged it directly. Their handshake lasted a moment longer than necessary, communicating something beyond words.
"Good match," Anderson said simply. "Fair play," Mueller responded, the English phrase practiced and deliberate. The game that followed would be remembered decades later by those who witnessed it. Not for extraordinary skill, though the level of play had improved dramatically over months of regular practice. Not for any particular goal or save, though several were remarkable. What distinguished this match was its perfect balance of competitive fire and mutual respect, a demonstration of how opposition could exist without hatred, how contest could thrive without contempt. When Anderson scored the opening goal, slipping past 2 defenders to find the corner of the net, Mueller was the first to acknowledge the quality of the play with a nod. When Weber equalized minutes later with a perfectly placed free kick, Anderson helped him up after he was fouled in the celebration.
Throughout 90 minutes of intense competition, this pattern continued, fierce rivalry tempered by recognition of shared humanity. The crowd responded to this spirit, cheering good plays regardless of which side executed them. German prisoners applauded remarkable saves by the American goalkeeper. Off-duty guards acknowledged the technical skill of the German midfielders. In this strange bubble of fair competition, national identity temporarily receded behind appreciation for the game itself. As the match entered its final minutes deadlocked at 2 goals each, tension mounted. Both sides pressed for the winning score, unwilling to settle for a diplomatic draw. When Mueller found himself with the ball at his feet just outside the American penalty area, the path to goal momentarily clear, time seemed to slow. He could see Anderson scrambling to close the gap, determination evident in every stride. The crowd's roar dimmed to a distant murmur as Mueller made his decision.
Rather than shooting directly, he executed a perfect passing move to Weber, who had positioned himself with a better angle. Weber's shot flew past the diving American keeper, securing victory with less than a minute remaining. The German spectators erupted in cheers, not of triumph over enemies, but of pride in their representatives. When the final whistle blew moments later, both teams stood breathing heavily, exhausted and somehow transformed. Anderson approached Mueller again, extending his hand. "Congratulations," he said, the word carrying weight beyond the immediate result. "Your team deserved it." Mueller accepted the handshake, suddenly aware of the strange territory they had entered, beyond prisoner and guard, beyond German and American, into some unmapped region where respect existed independent of circumstance. "Your team played with great heart," he replied. "We were fortunate." That evening, a small celebration took place in the German barracks. Extra rations had been authorized for the victorious team. Cookies, coffee, and cigarettes distributed with unexpected generosity. As the men relaxed in this momentary abundance, conversations inevitably turned to the significance of what had developed through these matches. "Did you see Anderson's face when Weber scored?" Eckhart asked, no longer the bitter skeptic of earlier months. "Disappointment, yes, but also appreciation. I never thought I would see an American look at a German that way during this war." Schmidt nodded thoughtfully. "The field has its own truth," he said, "different from what we were taught, different from what either side wants to believe about the other." "What truth is that?" Brandt asked. "That we are capable of seeing each other as worthy opponents rather than faceless enemies?" Mueller interjected. "That competition need not become annihilation." The observation hung in the air, its implications extending far beyond soccer. As news from Europe grew increasingly grim for Germany, Allied forces advancing from both east and west, German cities reduced to rubble by bombing, this alternative model of engagement offered a difficult hope. Not that Germany might still prevail militarily, but that something beyond total defeat and humiliation might be possible afterward. As Christmas approached, Captain Monroe authorized a special holiday tournament, a series of matches culminating in a final game scheduled for Christmas Eve. The announcement generated excitement throughout the camp, with teams reorganizing and practicing with renewed intensity despite the cold. For men far from home during wartime, this focus on immediate competition provided welcome distraction from the weight of separation and uncertainty. The holiday tournament structure intentionally mixed nationalities within teams, each squad composed of both prisoners and guards assigned randomly. This integration, initially viewed with skepticism, proved remarkably effective. Men who had competed against each other now found themselves strategizing together, developing plays that capitalized on each other's strengths, building the fragile trust required for effective teamwork. During one semifinal match, Mueller found himself playing alongside Lieutenant Anderson rather than against him. Their chemistry on the field proved surprisingly effective, Mueller's precise passing complementing Anderson's aggressive runs toward goal. When Anderson scored the winning point from Mueller's perfectly placed corner kick, their spontaneous celebration, a quick embrace before remembering their respective positions, captured the tournament's spirit. "Good ball," Anderson acknowledged as they walked back to midfield. "Good run," Mueller responded. The Christmas Eve final drew the largest crowd yet. Nearly every prisoner and off-duty guard in attendance, plus a delegation of local officials invited to observe this unusual phenomenon. Hot chocolate was served, a small camp band played holiday tunes, and the atmosphere combined competitive intensity with unexpected festivity. Snow had been cleared from the field, leaving the ground firm but playable. As the teams took their positions, each a mix of Germans and Americans, now wearing armbands to distinguish sides, the strangeness of the moment was lost on no one. Men who represented nations locked in existential conflict stood shoulder to shoulder, united temporarily by the simple objective of moving a ball into a net. The match itself would later be described in almost mythic terms by those who witnessed it. The quality of play transcended previous games, as though the unusual teams had unlocked new possibilities through their combination of different styles and approaches. European tactical awareness merged with American athletic power. European tactical awareness complemented American improvisational energy. The score swung back and forth, neither side able to establish dominance. In the waning minutes, with the match tied at 3 goals each, Mueller found himself in possession at midfield. Looking up, he saw Anderson making a diagonal run into open space. Without hesitation, Mueller delivered a perfectly weighted pass into his path. Anderson controlled it with one touch and drove toward goal, defenders converging from both sides. Rather than shooting, he passed laterally to Weber, who had positioned himself perfectly at the far post. Weber's gentle tap sent the ball across the line as the final whistle blew. The celebration that followed transcended the normal boundaries of prisoner and guard. Players embraced regardless of nationality, united by the shared experience of competition. Spectators applauded enthusiastically, acknowledging not just the athletic display, but also the deeper significance of what they had witnessed, a demonstration that cooperation was possible even between supposed enemies, that shared endeavor could create connections that ideology worked to prevent. When news of Germany's surrender reached Camp Concordia in May 1945, the soccer field again provided essential structure during a period of profound disorientation.
Rather than canceling activities in response to this momentous development, Captain Monroe authorized a special peace tournament with mixed teams composed of players who had competed together throughout the program. During the uncertain months following the war's end, as repatriation processes slowly began, soccer remained the camp's central institution. The regular schedule provided stability amid change, familiarity amid uncertainty. For men contemplating return to a homeland in ruins, these matches offered not just distraction, but reassurance, evidence that certain values survived even the most devastating conflict. In his final entry at Camp Concordia before repatriation, Mueller reflected on the transformation he had witnessed and experienced. When I arrived, I saw only enemies behind American faces. The soccer field changed this vision, not suddenly, but gradually, match by match. I leave seeing men, competitors, partners, individuals with names and skills and character. This, perhaps, is the most valuable thing I take home, more precious than the extra pounds gained from American rations or the English words added to my vocabulary. I take the knowledge that humanity persists even where hatred is commanded. This perspective would prove crucial during Germany's reconstruction.
Former prisoners who had experienced the soccer program returned with not just stories of American wealth or power, but accounts of fairness, respect, and dignified treatment. These narratives contradicted Soviet propaganda about Western intentions and helped establish the trust necessary for effective partnership during the Cold War period. In 1972, during the Munich Olympics, a group of aging American veterans traveled to Germany for a reunion with former prisoners they had guarded at Camp Concordia. The meeting, organized by Mueller and Anderson, now a doctor in Milwaukee as planned, centered around attending Olympic soccer matches together. The symbolism was perfect. Men who had once played together as enemies now watched together as allies and friends, their personal reconciliation mirroring the larger healing between their nations. The field taught us something essential, Mueller observed during this reunion. That rules freely accepted create the possibility of both vigorous opposition and deep respect. Perhaps this is the foundation of peace, not the absence of conflict, but its channeling into forms that preserve rather than destroy our humanity. This insight captured the enduring significance of the Camp Concordia soccer program and similar initiatives across America's prisoner of war system. What had begun as simple recreation had evolved into a kind of practical education in democracy and respect, not through lectures or indoctrination, but through direct experience of values in action. As we reflect on this largely forgotten chapter of World War II, perhaps we might ask ourselves, what unexpected spaces today might foster similar recognition across our deepest divides? Where might we create fields, literal or figurative, where respect can be earned rather than demanded, where character can be demonstrated rather than claimed, where we might see each other beyond the labels that so often prevent genuine understanding? The answers may shape our future as profoundly as those soccer matches once influenced the men who played them, on fields where enemies became simply opponents and opponents eventually became something more.